The storyboard for calling the 12 is a little bit more detailed because the story itself has some challenges in learning. It has a list, which is the 12 disciples. It has a sermon, just like the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus is talking to them. And during the last part, when he heals the man with the crippled hand, there is a lot of conversation going on. So all of these things make for a little bit of difficulty. Now, in learning the 12 disciples, I have created a silly story that helps me remember the 12 disciples when I tell this story. It may be so silly that it doesn't really appeal to you, but the purpose is for you to see what I do to help myself learn the story. Once you hear it, you may want to create your own, but at least you'll get the general idea. Let me first start by telling you the silly story. And the story goes not only through the 12 disciples, but on into the sermon that Jesus gives to them. And then at that point, we switch over to using hand gestures for the rest of this story. I'll start by telling you the entire silly story, and then I'll go back and explain each part of it. Two sets of brothers decide to have a farm. There's Simon Peter and his brother Andrew, James and John. Now, on their farm, there's a tomcat sitting on a mat right next to a barn that's filled up with milk. Simon is really zealous about the milk. James is less excited. Their work hand, Judas, is scared that he might become fat-ious. Outside the barn, there's this fence, and inside the fence is a sheep. And there's a wolf walking up crouching to get the sheep. All of a sudden, both of them see something. The wolf sees a snake, which scares him. And the sheep, sees a dove land on the fence. Well, the snake scares the wolf away, but as he leaves, he turns and he growls at the sheep, which scares him a bit. But the farmer comes over and pats him on the head and said, "Don't be afraid. I'm watching over you." Well, while he's saying that, he looks over and he sees a sparrow falling to the ground. He scratches his head over that. I told you it was a silly story. Now let's go back and look at it and see how I use this to remember the whole thing. Well, you have the two sets of brothers. These are established names that we have used in several stories up to this point. We have Simon Peter and his brother Andrew. We have James and John, the sons of thunder. The tomcat sitting on a mat is Thomas and Matthew. The barn is Bartholomew. The barn is Philip with milk. So we have Thomas, Matthew, Bartholomew, and Philip. Now Simon is zealous about the milk. That's Simon the Zealot. James is less excited. That's James the Less. The work hand is Judas, who's scared, that's Iscariot, Judas Iscariot. He's scared of becoming fat-ious or Thaddeus. Now that's kind of weak, but that helps me. So there you have the 12 disciples. You have Simon Peter, Andrew, James and John. You have Thomas, Matthew, Bartholomew, and Philip. Simon the Zealot, James the Less. You have Thaddeus and Judas Iscariot. Notice that I changed those names around. It doesn't matter. Once I know them, then I can take them and kind of switch them around a little bit as long as I get all 12 in. Now, at this point, you need to establish whether this works for you. I can probably tell you it doesn't. You need to work on your own story. Matter of fact, if you're working with someone or in a group together, think of those 12 names and how would you come up with a story or some way to remember them. Now, the rest of the story you may actually be able to use. You have that fence just outside the barn with the sheep on the inside and the wolf. Well, Jesus said, I'm calling you to be as sheep among wolves. You're to be as wise as a snake. That's the snake that the wolf saw, and harmless as a dove that lands on the fence. And the wolf growls at the sheep. Jesus said, people are going to hate you just like they hated me. The farmer pats him on the head, but don't be afraid. The Father is watching over you. He even knows when a sparrow falls. He's even counted the number of hairs upon your head. Okay. If you like that, and if that does help you, then review this several times until you get that part of the story down. Now, we're going to switch over to hand gestures now, and it starts with the farmer looking over at the sparrow and kind of scratching his head. And so you have, and then you just bring it down to a fist, kind of like you're pulling hair off of the top of your head, which I can't afford to do, but you just kind of bring it down. People will be bold and confess me, just like I have acknowledged me, just like I have acknowledged you before the Father. So be bold, acknowledge me, just like I have acknowledged you before the Father. Now your hands are up, and you kind of bring your thumb and your finger together, because this is the sign for family. So acknowledge me before the Father, and then I actually bring this down and just look at my fingers going together. And that helps me to remember the next thing. That your family wants you to be loyal to them more than me. But if you do that, you are not worthy of me. And now with your hand out, you just bring the other one. And if you're to follow me, then just as you follow me, take up and hold your cross. You're to take your cross and bear my shame. Okay, so you be bold and acknowledge me, just like I have acknowledged you. Your family wants you to be loyal to them rather than me. But if you do, you're not worthy of me. If you're to follow me, you're to take up my cross and bear my shame. Now with your hands up here, you bring your hands down over your heart and kind of pull it together, that if you will find your life without me, you will lose it. So you have bear my cross, take your cross and bear my shame. And if you find your life without me, you will lose it. But if you lose your life because of me, then you will find it. Now at this point right here, we go into the story about the man with the crippled hand, but let's just, at this point right here, we're going to bring it up with a crippled hand, but let's just go back and review that part. It starts with the farmer scratching his head as he looks at the sparrow. Bring it down, be bold, and acknowledge me, just like I have acknowledged you before the Father. Then you bring your fingers down. Members of your family want you to be loyal to them rather than me. But if you do, you're not worthy of me. If you follow me, you're to take your cross and bear my shame. If you find your life without me, you will lose it. But if you lose your life because of me, then you will find it. Now you go up to the crippled hand, the man with the crippled hand, and the Pharisees. I kind of hold, like, it's just like I'm holding my vest right here. So you have the crippled hand and the Pharisees, and they ask a question. Is it right to heal on the Sabbath? So you have a crippled hand, Pharisees ask the question. Well, Jesus asks a question back, and he says, is it right to do good or to do evil? To save life or destroy it? Let's just go through that. Is it right to do good or to do evil? To save life or destroy it? Then, how many of you would rescue a sheep? You have to kind of put your hands out like you're going to rescue this sheep. And then, with your hands out, you bring this back up. You ask the man, stretch out your hand. He stretches out his hand. And the Pharisees are mad. So the stretching out the hand, it turns in that they're mad. So let's just go through that section. You have the person with the crippled hand and the Pharisees. And they ask the question, is it right to heal on the Sabbath? Is it right to do good or to do evil? To save life or destroy it? How many would rescue a sheep? Then he says, stretch forth your hand. The Pharisees are angry. Okay. Go through this storyboard several times. Very important to draw this one out. It has a lot of various complications, but you can see that there's a detailed storyboard to help you to try it. And if you get all this down, this is really an excellent story to tell and a very important one. Well, the Lord bless you as you become one of His disciples.